conditions where current has your bait stretched out on the bottom is they're going to bite the bait, they're going to bite the bait, and then your rod's going to load up and stay loaded up. And when that happens, you just crank on it right in the rod holder. What we're doing when the sharks and Goliaths aren't bad, we're just fishing a 3-way swivel. I have the people crank this lead to the surface, I hand it to them, and then we hand line the fish up the rest of the way. When the Goliath groupers have been bad or the sharks have been bad, we've rigged a inline swivel, which is made by a company called Spro. They're really small barrel swivels that we use for tuna fishing that are 80 pound in strength. And what we do is we put one of these beads on the leader between two swivels. Okay, so I have a barrel swivel where my main line connection is to the start of my 50-foot leader, and on the mono, not on the braid, is the bead. My bank sinker is above the Spro swivel, and what I do is I take a rubber band and I secure everything there with a rigging rubber band that breaks when it hits the rod tip. And what happens is when this hits the rod tip as you're cranking up, the swivel and the bead and the lead break free and slide 50 feet down the leader. Now I've got another Spro swivel that's about 2 feet in front of the bait, and the bead now this time is on the rod tip side of the swivel. If you can visualize it, it slides down, the bead hits the swivel, the lead stops on the bead so it doesn't slide to the hook to dehook the fish. So if you're in an area where Goliath groupers are bad, which is common down off the Loran Tower, if you fish any Rex or FPL or any of these high relief areas or big public spots, it's common to have Goliath groupers interrupt your fishing. And one of the things that we've found is being able to continuously crank in high gear without any interruption of pausing and passing the lead, and then there you go. Yeah, I think so. If you have wet hands, or you were cutting a bait for another rod, right? You got fish slime on your hands. Now your one rod goes off and your buddy's cranking it up, and you try to hand line, and you're just slipping with the 30 or 40 or 50 pound leader that you're using, and all of a sudden those fish take advantage of that. The sharks do, and the Goliath groupers do. Now, I haven't done it yet, but my plan when I get anchored up mutton fishing next time that we start to have shark problems is when I'm fishing with that rig, attached to that rig is going to be the Zeppelin, and when the Zeppelin and the lead slide down, the Zeppelin's going to be on a drop, and what I mean by that is just a long piece of mono, right? So it's not on the rig while I'm fishing, but I can clip it on with the carabiner clip when the lead hits the rod tip, and everything's going to go down together, and this Zeppelin's going to swing below the fish. And we'll get into the Zeppelin stuff here in a little bit, and it'll get below the fish. So it's not technically it's not going to help you with Goliath groupers because they don't have that sensory. But if you're in an area where sharks are a problem and you're fishing long leaders like this, the only way that I can see to feasibly fish this Zeppelin to prevent the sharks from depredating your fish is to have it be on like a 6-foot mono drop, and you can clip it on when you're fighting your fish in the rod holder. You just clip this carabiner clip on your main line with 6 foot of line, and when everything hits the rod tip, it's all going to slide down the rod together, the bead, the lead, the carabiner clip, and the Zeppelin. And when it all hits the swivel 2 feet in front of the fish, it's going to stop, and now the 6-foot leader is going to swing below the snapper, and it's going to create this magnetic force field that they're deterring from below your fish. So we'll get a little more into that rigging as I get into that section of talking. But I usually, again, like to start with 80 pound leader when I'm mutton fishing, and even mangrove snapper fishing for some of the bigger mangroves. We caught one that was 10 pounds the other day, a couple days ago on 80 pound. The one that we caught today was about 6 pounds, was on 80 pound, even though we weren't targeting him. It ate a live bait. And if we're not getting bites, I'll switch one rod to 50 pound, and we get down as far as 30 pound. But especially with targeting the mangroves and stuff like that, you can get down into that level, especially with the 3, 4, and 5 pound mangroves. But you get a bite from a 10-pound mangrove on 40-pound on the bottom, or 30-pound on the bottom, most likely you're going to have a problem. And any quality size mutton, it's going to take a lot of luck for him not to angle back towards the reef to cut you off. So always start with heavier leader. I think would be the biggest takeaway for both the snapper fishing and grouper fishing. If you're not getting bites in an area, downsize your leader. Always try to have that one step higher advantage, if that makes sense, when you're bottom fishing, right? The fish know the structure. You don't know exactly where you are or how everything lays if you don't dive. I've fished areas long enough to know now when I get bites, if a fish rocks me up, I can go a certain direction and try to pull them out of the bottom with the boat if we're not anchored up. And you know where the caves are and you know where the ledges are. If you dive, getting any kind of better understanding of the bottom that you fish is a huge advantage to yourself as an angler. When we anchor and fish any of the long leaders and stuff like that, or anchor for groupers or whatever we do, always try to anchor not directly on the structure but in the sand away from it. One, so your leads don't stick in the bottom, but two, it may take a little longer to get a bite than when power fishing because you're drawing the fish away from the reef, but when you do, you're at an advantage, right? Because they're out in the sand, they've got to run further and they've got to pull more drag to get back in the structure. Not always does that work, because if you have to let a lot of anchor line out while you're bottom fishing because of the current, the more anchor line you let out, the more you're going to swing. And when you swing, you're going to get close to the reef. Sometimes you can go up on top of it and get hung up. You're going to swing off of it. So there's variables involved with anchoring, but always try to anchor off the structure. If I'm fishing 50-foot leaders and I'm marking fish in a spot and my drift is 340 degrees, when I test my drift out, I'm going to anchor. You're going to take 340 minus 180. That's going to be your heading that you're going to go away from your spot. You got a 50-foot leader. I want to be 50 feet away from my mark, right? So my leaders are going to go back or even a little further. And it's nice to have an angle to the drift, in my opinion. If you're laying, 10 degrees east or west of due north when you're anchored up, or facing due south, but your lines are going due north. If you're 10 degrees off, it's nice because your stuff can kind of go into the reef at an angle and you can be off in the sand a little easier, which seems to form for better fishing at times. Pretty typical for anchoring, I would say, is 2.5 to 1 with my boat on anchor line versus depth. But I've also anchored with 600 foot of rope and 90 foot of water or 75 foot of water. And I've got a plow anchor that works really well with 25 foot of chain. So the chain's really what helps dig the anchor in, right, and keep it on the bottom. And if you miss your spot, if you don't have I see a lot of boats with trolling motors now, but if you miss your spot anchoring and you're not 100% dialed in on it, and I miss all the time, you do. You just do. Like you can drift. You can totally drift 2 times the same direction. You anchor up and you lay entirely differently. So I have a safety line that's on my boat that I use for my dredge reel and my electric reels when we're bottom fishing with the electrics. And it's pretty easy to create a bridle off the bow of the boat. And by that I mean I just take my the line off the bow through the chalk and the bow cleat, and I lay this lazy line on my bow cleat, and then I run the line over the anchor line and then back to the cleat. So now it comes off the side of the boat instead of right off the bow, 4, 5, 6, 8, 10 feet, however much I need it to. And now instead of my boat laying straight into the current, it's laying like this and it's steering one way or another, and it gets you back in position. And if you go a little bit too far, then you just cinch it up a little bit and you come back. So it kind of minimizes you having to pull the anchor a whole bunch of times. So it's nice to have that. It's like Rocky always says from the safari, it's a geometrical brain tease. He's a lot smarter than I am too, and it's anchoring up can be a challenge, but also extremely productive, especially for targeting the bigger snappers. I wouldn't say it's imperative for good grouper fishing, but for the bigger mangrove and mutton fishing, definitely need to anchor to have better fishing. A lot of people ask me all the time about chumming, snapper fishing, and grouper fishing. The only chum that goes over is when I make a plug bait and I throw the dorsal or the tail over, or the head and the tail of a dinosaur's head and the tail of the sardine or whatever we're cutting up, throw them over. I try not to put any other chum in the water besides that because of the sharks. You know, and the tails, we catch snappers all the time when there's mild enough current where the tails will sink down, or they come up in the water column and eat them. They hit the deck and they spit the tail up, or they spit a head of a greenie up, or whatever the case may be. They spit chicken wings up too. If you like to eat chicken and you're snapper fishing, when you throw your bones over, something about the way they waffle down. Snappers love to eat chicken bones as well, so it can kind of be a unique form of chum for you. With the mutton fishing, on the hook I have on here, it again is a 9174 Mustad Ultra Point. I'm going to pass these around just so you guys can take a look at them. They didn't have the 8.0 here, but a 7.0 would probably work as well. And I use the 4.0 for the mangrove and mutton fishing. I also use it for chicken rig fishing. I've never broken one of those hooks. Knock on wood, I have not broken one of those 4.0 hooks, and we've caught 30-pound cobias, 20-pound groupers, double headers of amberjacks, all kinds of stuff that you would think would break the hook. We've caught big sharks on it that have eaten our fish on the chicken rig prior to incorporating the Zeppelin here lately, and they're extremely strong hook. I have had, just like any other hook manufacturer, and I always look at my hooks, no fault to anybody, it's just mass production in my opinion. I have pulled hooks out that are missing the barbs or the points are broken. So I mean, anytime you're tying a hook on, just try to be aware of what the hook looks like. When you are bottom fishing, if you snag bottom, you know, always check your hook point if you get your rig back, because a lot of times your hook could be just in the bottom and it can bend the point over or dull it over. So to me, you know, it's the simplest thing to do is just to retie, check your knots. You want to stay on top of your leaders when you're bottom fishing. You know, anytime you pull in a long leader, I always run it through my hand when I'm doing a bait check, just to make sure that the line didn't get in the reef and we didn't know it when the boat was swinging or whatever, and maybe it got chafed up, especially with that lighter line of 30, 40, 50 pound. And obviously after you catch fish or you pull a fish off on the heavier leaders, always check them for chafe and wear and tear. Chicken rig fishing, probably a charter boat's best friend, really. And a lot of people don't realize what you can catch on a chicken rig, but if you fish different baits on a chicken rig, you can catch all kinds of stuff. And I fish all my chicken rigs with 50 pound. A chicken rig is just a 2-hook rig with the 4/0, and we've got the surgeon's loop on the bottom to put the bang sinkers on. It just goes right to a snap swivel. You can see I really don't even care about my tag end when I'm tying stuff fast or in the heat of the moment. It's really not important for a quality bite. We're sending this down. You can set the hook all day long. The guy who wants to set the hook on my boat gets a chicken rig because he gets to set the hook all day. And the reason why is your lead is below your hooks. So when you go to set the hook, you're directly connecting to the fish, right, when you get a bite. Phenomenal for obviously sea bass, triggerfish, lane snappers, stuff like that. Typically with the triggerfish, small pieces of squid and the jumbo beeliners, going to be small pieces of squid, even squid tentacles. I'll just whatever, a piece of squid that's twice the size of the hook, and I'll hook it on there twice so it stays on well, send it down and let her rip. For the big lane snappers, red groupers, scamp groupers, and other snappers and stuff that we're catching, I typically will fish a cut bait. I love to fish with cut herring. The herring itself, we'll cut it into 3 or 4 pieces, and we'll fish the head as well at times, just not the tail. And on a herring, their belly line is got a hard spot, that little ridge that sometimes will feel like you're cutting your finger on. So we always hook through the belly, not through the back, because the back meat is very soft and it'll pull off easily. And you can send this down. The biggest thing about the chicken rig fishing when you're looking for a bigger snapper or a grouper is let the grunts, let everything else peck away at it, right? So you're gonna send these chunks of meat down there, and I call it like machine gun bites or vibration bites. Your rod's gonna go like this. and you want to wait until that singular solid double tap, and when you get that, you respond to that with your hook set. And that's where we're, you know, when the big lanes are here and areas where we catch red groupers when they show up in decent numbers, you know, that's where you're a little more patient with the bigger piece of bait. Cut blue runner and cut herring seem to work best, in my opinion, and bonita as well. With the bonita, when I side it out, I'll take all the meat off except for maybe a half an inch of meat, and then hook that on there, and just I do little, not strips, but they're going to be like, if you could envision that being a square, that would be on there, and that would be your bonita chunk, right? And that's about the size that I would cut a herring. Obviously, it's not going to be that tall from dorsal to ventral, but you can get 4 or 5 baits out of a single herring when you throw the tail away. Obviously, if you're dropping a single hook rig, which is another setup here where we like to catch the mangroves with, it's very imperative to have those belly hook rigs hooked in the center so it doesn't spin your rig up on the way down. This doesn't matter. I mean, obviously you don't want to hook it, you know, all the way over on one side. It kind of defeats the purpose, but if it spins up a little bit on the way down, it's going to unspin itself when it stops running down, and it's not that big of a deal. So, you know, you can just hook it. If this were the chunk here, obviously you want to go right in the center, and then it's got the heavy ridge on the bottom that'll help prevent it from getting pulled off as easy. Any questions up to this point, guys? Yes, sir.
On an average on your mutton, you say you're using 80 pound, you start with 8 pounds?
Start with 80, yes,
and
sir.
On an average, you're running a 50-foot leader?
50 foot, yep.
Okay.
With mangroves, you know, a lot of the areas we catch mangroves and muttons together, but the mangroves will gather up for the spawn and kind of push the muttons out in some areas, and we'll go with a shorter leader with doing that. You can get away with 12 or 15 foot on the bigger baits for the bigger ones, and then, like I said, if you have the right conditions, this is another rig we'll use for mangrove fishing, and this is just a short leader rig, and you would just send your bait down and let it sit on the bottom. You can fish a pilchard on here, a sardine on here, or a piece of cut bait like we talked about. Sometimes if there's a little bit of current, or depending on the scenario, if we're having issues with the rig spinning up, I'll take a herring, cut the head and tail off, and then cut right down the backbone, and you just hook the hook in the tail end of the two pieces when you use it. So you have a piece that's the belly, and you have a piece that's the back, and you go right through the center and out the tail section, so the narrow end is going down first. It's a more streamlined bait. It's just like the same type of bait that you would fish on your long leader, except you've shortened it up, and I'll typically make it smaller. So if I have a herring bait that's that long on the belly, I'll typically cut it back to be a little bit shorter. This is we don't really want this to be a peck away type of bait for the mangroves like they'll do on the bigger baits. We want this to be one and done, in my opinion. So I do shorten up the bait a little bit. Nighttime, you can get the fish up in the water column, and some guys do really well with that, chumming, and then they, you know, drifting back live shrimp or little pieces of cut bait, glass minnows and stuff, almost like yellowtailing down in the Keys, minus the chum balls, and you can get them up in the water column. But in my experience, in the early years of doing that, has kind of turned into attracting a lot of blue runners and other stuff, and so we've tried to stay away from it and just catch what we can with minimized chumming. Any questions? All right, so let's talk about maybe trying to find spots. So obviously Martin County is, and in St. Lucie County for that matter, we've got a great artificial reef program here. We catch a tremendous amount of quality bottom fish on all the public spots when we hop around. You know, just because they're high relief doesn't mean they're not going to hold good fish. I mean, high relief is going to get a lot more pressure, obviously. Public spots are going to get a lot more pressure. But they're typically a lot bigger, and you know, you can look at like the Langford is like acres of area of bottom, right? So fish can move all over that. They can be off of it. You know, those are spots you can anchor up away and draw the fish to you because they're kind of snaggy areas. And there's some caberas and other stuff there that you can catch that are bigger, but All the public spots, in my opinion, hold fish and quality fish at certain times. Very condition oriented bottom fishing is. When we're trying to learn the lay of a public spot, really it's just kind of become through trial and error, in my opinion. I mean, you understand how a ship lays on the bottom. You start to learn the mass. You start to learn on days you're on the east side if your fish get into the structure more easily. Maybe there's a breach in the hull or I don't know, portholes or something there that they can sneak into or get you around into the pilot house of a tugboat or whatever the case may be. And maybe that doesn't happen on the west side. So you try to look for the advantages and piece the puzzles together through times and experience of fishing these areas, in my opinion. And you can just take notes and kind of map it out. I mean, it's really easy to take notes on your phone. I try not to use my phone too much during the day, but I take a lot of notes on it in the phone, not only what we catch, because now I have to report everything, but also just how the bite was and the conditions were, so I can log everything into my book at home. And if you get to a point where you're doing something like that and you're really into bottom fishing, all that data is just going to start to compile itself and help you out and help you better understand from the surface what that bottom structure is like. And we will see there's times where we go to high relief spots that are going to be pretty well prone to amberjacks and almaco jacks, rudderfish at times, bigger areas. But when you go to areas that have amberjacks and rudderfish and almaco jacks there, that area is alive, right? You can go there 10 days in a row or over 8 months and maybe you don't see anything, and then you go one day there and there's life there. Start fishing, because something has changed in that day you're there, right? I'm out there every day. I'm not saying we're going to the same spots every day, but if you're only fortunate enough to fish a couple times a month and you're trolling over these areas looking for something to drop on, you don't see life, and you go over the same stretch of the Wickstrom Reef for 2 months straight, and then all of a sudden you go out there and one of the spots is lit up like a Christmas tree, high and low. Start fishing. A lot of people frown on the amberjacks, but I started eating them when I worked for Glenn Cameron on the Floridian. I never ate an amberjack till he convinced me to do it in Fort Pierce 20 years ago, and we brought it fresh up to the original tiki place, and it was hard to tell the difference between that and the grouper fried, except for the grain of meat. And I know it's hard for a lot of people to believe, but it is very good. Obviously, it's very good smoked. Worms are a deterrent for people, but the way I see it, you can see them and you can cut them out. So it's not like you're going to be eating them. Most all fish have some kind of worm in them, but the rudder fish are very good. Excellent sashimi. We bleed all those in the throat. So when you're catching those rudder fish, instead of throwing them back, try them out. They're excellent fried and blackened. And then once you catch a few of those fish, even if you're letting them go and you don't want to keep them or smoke them or whatever you want to do, they'll stop biting eventually, and you're going to get through them and get down. Maybe what you try to do is, if we catch a few amberjacks and there's amberjacks there, but I feel like I'm marking groupers or snappers, what I'll do is I'll just pull further ahead, meaning to the south, because I'm drifting naturally to the north, and get my baits below that, right? And so hopefully now they're on the bottom and the amberjacks don't see them, or the jacks don't see them, and free dive down. I can literally, people always ask, well, how do you know when to tell me to stop or when I'm going to hit the bottom? I can see your bait going down on my bottom machine. I can see your lead hit the bottom. I can see the bait go down, and I can see when stuff in high relief, and most of you will be able to do it on your machine as well. You'll see a school of jacks marking here sitting above a wreck, and you go to drop, and all of a sudden the whole school will go like this. Now you know your bait's in that zone. If you want to catch one, just stop it, right? No sense in going all the way to the bottom and fighting them further if you don't have to, right? So stop it where you see them change their level in the water column, and then you just wait there for the bite. Now, it's funny with amberjacks. Amberjacks can be a really subtle bite. We've caught 100-pound amberjacks. I've sent down 2 and 3 pound blue runners, and the people go, this is a small fish. I said, it's not possible. You sent down a bait that was this big. A lot of times when they bite, if you went down through where they've been hanging out, they're hanging out in an area because they like the water temperature or whatever the case may be. If they dive down and they kind of free dive down to eat your bait, a lot of times it's just a doink, and then they start to swim back up, right? and you know you got something on, it's heavier than your bait, but it's not really fighting. And that's where everybody's like, it's not a very big fish. And then all of a sudden they hit that level where they're with their buddies and it's game on, right? So the whole entire platform changes and the attitude changes. But it's something that you can kind of figure out and see. You can control where you want to hook those fish when they're biting, right? So like I said, again, you don't have to go all the way to the bottom. If you want to bypass them, a lot of times what we'll do again is I'll move further to the south. I'll go another 150 or 200 feet further to the south. We'll get our baits down to the bottom, right? And sometimes if the water quality is good, they can see down there, you can see them swim down to bite. Other times you get by it and you get into a zone where you're no amberjacks, you've got good bait, you've drifted through the sand, you're getting to the structure, and you get your grouper and your snapper bites. So there are ways to get around them, and it doesn't work all the time, but a lot of the times you can get just further away, and it's just going to take you a little bit longer. It's going to take you 4 or 5 minutes power fishing back to the north. Okay, so power fishing real quick, we didn't touch base on this, just to give you a visualization. If this is the structure here, and here's my boat, and the current is going to the north, right? I'm going to, depending on how strong the current is, I'm going to move my boat a certain distance south of the structure, right? That number is going to vary. You're just going to have to figure it out with your own. There's really no formula because I don't know what pound braid you're using. I don't know what lead you're going to use. You know, you can get down really quick with a 24-ounce lead and not go further south. But if you want to use a 10-ounce lead, or if you have 65-pound braid versus 100-pound braid, or you're using mono, so there's a lot of variables involved. You'll just have to figure it out with your equipment, what you're using and what weight size you should use to maximize your time. But you're going to go past the structure, you're going to send your baits down, and then you're just going to hold the boat into the current as you slowly slide to the north. So you're still sliding to the north, but you're just slowing the drift down instead of anchoring. You can get away with a lot lighter lead doing this type of fishing than you can anchoring. Let's say I can power fish with 2 knots of current in 90 foot of water with 100-pound braid with 12 ounces of lead. If I anchor up, I've probably got to use 1.5 pounds. So you're bouncing along, you should be able to feel your lead skipping. So I tell my guys, you feel your lead skipping, and I can see it in the rod tip too, but I always like people to get a feel for what's going on. So you feel your lead skipping? Yes, I do. If it stops, it's one of two things. You're either off the bottom or you're snagged. So I can see people get snagged before they know they're snagged because their rod stops skipping and it just slowly starts to bend. The easiest thing to do when you get snagged is just pop your rod up and down really aggressively. And a lot of times if it's just a lead, it's going to pop right out. If it doesn't, kind of for demonstration purposes, steam a little further south away, and if it got stuck like under a rock, most likely you can pull it out going to the south. But I would say 7 out of 10 times, you start popping your rod, holding down by that butt end and up by the foregrip and just really popping it aggressively, you're going to pop that lead out, right? If you're not stuck and it stops skipping, you can let a little more line out. Is it imperative to be right on the bottom all the time? Absolutely not, because you're fishing 10 foot, 12 foot, 15 foot a leader, your bait's not there. So if your lead's a foot off the bottom, you can't say it's going to make that big of a difference. However, for me, knowing where people's baits are because they're lacking feel from not doing it a lot, it's nice to be able to see the lead skip. It's nice, I can tell the difference between the skip and a bite. And you can tell with the braid when your bait gets nervous. Again, when your bait starts to get nervous, we do what we talked about earlier. You can kind of slowly tease that bait up away from the bottom, or your lead, right? Your bait's probably already away from the bottom, but slowly start to tease your lead up, and just 1 or 2 really slow cranks and lifting away, that's 12 extra feet that you've given yourself an advantage. So when you're fishing areas that are high relief, like a wreck or a tug or something that maybe comes up 7, 8, 10 feet off the bottom, 15, 20 feet off the bottom, now you got to think too, if you're hooking anywhere near that high pinnacle of the relief and your bait was on the bottom, you don't have to come just 10 feet, you got to come 30 feet, right? To get away from the structure. So, you know, I always try to tell people the first 30 or 40 feet is really important to try to grind out, you know, depending on where we're fishing. But the high relief stuff, the tugs, Mullifin, the Rankin, any of the Wickstrom stuff, the Halsey, the David T, any of that stuff, you really got to work hard to get your bait away. And that's if you're skipping along on the top or really close to the side. If you go around and survey the area when you get there, or if you're trolling and you're surveying bottom, which I do all day long when I troll, I just connect the dots on bottom structure if we're not catching anything on the surface, and I look for spots to drop. When I see an area that I want to drop on, I make a mental note. If I don't do it right there, I'll come back in a little while. But when I come back, I'm going to map that whole section of reef out. First thing I'm going to do is look for fish that are out in the sand, because that gives us a huge advantage if we can catch them there before they move in. If I start catching the fish close, then everything's going to scatter that was away. They don't come in, right? So if I can pick away some fish that are out in the sand, everything's going to actually start to gravitate to the structure naturally. And then we're going to go and we'll be able to ping off another fish or two. So maybe you can catch 4 or 5 fish in a spot if they're groupers, and then you leave and you let it rejuvenate itself over the couple of weeks. So has anybody got any questions about power fishing? No? You guys are an easy crowd, either that or I'm not making any sense. I don't know. Yes, sir. Oh, okay. As far as, I didn't say about with bait, but I will say this. I mean, when I bottom fish, I like to have the widest variety of bait that I can have. When I snapper fish, I like to start with dead bait in any way, shape, or form that I can when I'm anchored. The reason why is if you start with live bait, you're never going to get bites on the dead bait. If I start with dead bait and they start to get used to that and they stop biting, I can send down a sardine. Guess what? I got a bite. I get them fired up again. Or you send down a herring or something with its tail cut off or whatever the case may be. You start getting bites again. You kind of trick them back into feeding, and then you can just slide another dead bait out. You know, snappers I don't mind when there's hundreds of snappers in an area and they're spawning or aggregating versus 8 or 10 groupers. Sit there and catch your limit of 10, you know, or 20 or whatever it is that they're biting. If you're on a spot where you're marking 10 or 15 groupers, you don't want to catch all 10. You know, you catch 2 or 3 or 4, move on to another spot, let that spot rejuvenate. It's like a crab trap. If you leave a stone crab in your crab trap, more crabs will come back versus quicker. At least they did when I did it. They would come back quicker than if you empty the trap out and just put another can of cat food in there. When we are bottom fishing, especially chicken rig fishing, one of the things you'll notice, which our cobia season, for lack of a better term, was absolutely horrible this year, and continues to be horrible, and I think that's directly attributed to all the dead loss from sharks the last 2 or 3 years, which just a lot of us have said the fishery wasn't sustainable. I think we're suffering that right now. I always try to have a Cobia Slayer Jig. I've been using these jigs probably 20 plus years. I think I was casting these back with VJ when I worked with him on the Bone Shaker, and it's always been my favorite jig. I don't carry any other jig offshore for cobia fishing than this jig. If I can catch jigs on cobia casting at a turtle or a ray, I'm going to use that all day long, because if I cast a bait, a couple things will happen. Inevitably you go to try to cast a bait really far. What happens? You cast it off, right? Or hits the water, and when there's a manta ray or a leatherback turtle, there's typically remoras with it. Well, what happens? How many times you catch a remora? I can 100% say I have only caught in my lifetime 1 remora on a Cobia Slayer Jig. It's always been cobias. So when we're pitching at them, or when we're anchored up bottom fishing, or we're drift fishing and we're catching snappers, vermilion snappers, sea bass, lane snappers, triggerfish, whatever, with our chicken rigs, it's inevitable during peak season that somewhere along the line, cobias are going to follow your chicken rig fish up. So it's always good if you have an extra spinning rod to have it ready to go. If you don't have an extra spinning rod, fishing it with a snap swivel, your chicken rig with a snap swivel, and then just having these in your cup holder ready to go with, say, 4 foot a leader, 50 pound, with a perfection loop on it. And that way when you get up there, you can just quickly unclip your chicken rig and clip the jig on and sink it down and jig it back up. One of the biggest things with this type of jigging, just like any other type of jigging that I see, is I've always tried to demonstrate this, and it's very challenging to do, but one of the biggest things that I always see people do is they either do little jigs like this, which to me is not doing anything, or they do a big jig but then they just do like 5 or 6 cranks, right? So many reels now are such high speed, right? This, every time you turn this handle, is 42 inches of line. Cobias eat the jig on the fall. So when you jig, you want your jig to have a lot of aggressive movement to it, but it's gotta fall. So when they bite it on the fall, what has to happen? Your jig has to be really aggressive, otherwise you're not going to set the hook in their gummy lips and their bony mouth for crushing crabs. So when we cast out, if we're just blind jigging or whatever the case may be, I tell people we're on the sand pile, cast out, count to 30. So we have live baits out on one side of the boat, somebody's casting a jig on the other side of the boat. Again, we're trying to create a big footprint, just like any type of fishing we're doing, to cover area. We're letting the jig sink down to cover water column. When I cobia fish with live bait, I fish 3 to 4 live baits. They've all got different size leads on them and they're all at different depths. Until we start getting a bite at a certain depth, then I'll start adding. So if I'm fishing a bait with a 1 ounce lead, a bait with a 3 ounce lead, a bait with depending on current, a bait with a 6 ounce lead. So I got a 6 ounce lead on the bottom, 3 ounce lead mid column, a 1 ounce lead is just a couple feet below the surface. Cobias mill around all the time. They go up, down with whatever they're following or if they're by themselves. So if you have these baits at different levels and you get bites, yes, a lot of occasions you can get bites on all 3 rods. Sometimes there's only 1 rod that's getting bit. Well, after that happens 2 or 3 times, we're going to start fishing 2 rods at that depth, right? And what I do is I'll spread those 2 rods out and fish the 3rd rod in between them. So hopefully we can start getting fish to bite at all 3 rods, right? Try to maximize that. So the guy's cast his jig out. When he's jigging back, he's going to do a really aggressive jig, and then one or two cranks down. And when you're jigging and you crank down, you don't want to crank all the slack up. So you're dropping your tip and cranking, but only 1 or 2 cranks, and you still have slack in your line. If you're cranking to where you're tight and the jig's kind of just starting to move flat or straight, that's going to be no good. So you want this jig going up, down, all the way back to the boat. If you get thumped, you're going to get thumped when you're setting the hook or jigging again. So you're technically setting the hook, right? If you have cobias follow you all the way to the boat, there's 2 things you can do. To me, the more effective thing is to just open your bail and let the jig fall, and they'll chase it down, and as soon as you stop it, usually one hits it on the way down and you're instantly hooked up. The other thing that can work, if you don't want to drop out of your sight, is just move your rod in a quick figure 8 a couple times, and a lot of times a fish will eat it. Typically there's more than one, so there is a level of competition involved when they follow your rig up to the boat. So having this ready while you're chicken rig fishing is vital. Having it ready when you're trolling, in case you see a leatherback turtle or a manta ray, or if you see a couple free swimmers on a weed line or a dirty green to green change or something in 60 foot, 70 foot of water. Always good to have. When we do our blind jigging on wrecks where I feel like we're marking them or we're just scoping an area out, I'll typically use the 3 ounce. When we're fishing anywhere else, I'll typically use the 2 ounce. I fish with the pink and white. I do carry chartreuse too. I love the pink in the green water. I love the white in the blue water. And there are times where you're doing a lot of cobia fishing and they're only biting 1 color. Have multiple colors if you're going to carry them, just because you can throw a jig and they'll follow it, not eat it. You change the color, and as soon as it hits the water, you're getting bit. I've seen it happen countless times. Easy to have in your box, easy to have rigged up and ready to roll. You can buy spare tails for them, and it's just nice to have those bonus fish anytime that they appear. All right. We're going to talk a little bit about this device here that I was introduced to, I guess maybe 6 weeks ago. It's called the Zeppelin. It's made by a company called Sharkbanz. They make, or they started their company making Sharkbanz, literally for people's wrists and ankles for diving. They've started this technology, which is magnetic technology. It's live all the time. There's no on-off switch or anything like that. I probably wouldn't use it if you have a pacemaker and you don't want to put it near your phone. But I'll just be just gonna be frank with you. I was very skeptical at first, and I'm not part owner or anything like that. I'm just trying to protect my livelihood. The guys came and fished with me a couple days last month, I guess it was, and they were telling me that, you know, oh, it's got to be 3 feet below the tail of the fish that you're catching. And of course, we're having a big problem with sharks eating sailfish, mahis, tunas. There's 4 charter boats, and of course, sailfish season is wound down, but there's 4 charter boats between here and Palm Beach that we've seen 88 sails between the 4 of us get eaten, seen them get eaten since January 1st, and that's not including post-release mortality, which some of us, including members of councils and maybe even the Billfish Foundation, think it could be up to 40 or 50%. So that's a scary number when you think about that for a species that's never really been targeted. I mean, the only thing that should naturally catch a sail in its environment is a mako. A sail is the fastest fish in the ocean. The mako shark is faster. It's the fastest creature in the ocean. So in a natural environment, that should really be the only thing that eats it. Last year, I was pre-fishing, I guess it was 2 years ago now, down south for sailfish tournaments, and we had a fish coming up to eat a kite bait, and it was eaten by sharks before it engaged the bait. So there's a lot of pack feeding going on. I'm sure if you fish at all here or Jupiter or Palm Beach in recent years, you've had shark interactions. This we haven't really come up with a way. I shouldn't say it can't help. We haven't come up with a way. I haven't personally seen a way where that weighs 6.5 ounces is going to help you prevent a sail or a dolphin from being eaten, because fish that are jumping and you slide this on your 20-pound line and it makes a change in direction, is probably going to break your line, right? So people are not going to want to take that risk. We started using it bottom fishing, and the guys from Zeppelin came. Like I said, flat out honest with you, I didn't really comprehend how it could be rigged. When I was told it needed to be 3 feet below the tail of your fish, and I'm fishing a 3-way swivel with a 10-foot leader, and I'm thinking I got to use this as part of my lead, right? I've just started using it as part of my rig. So now my lead drop on my 3-way swivel was 15 feet instead of 15 inches, right? So what happens, you run the risk of losing this in the bottom, getting snagged or breaking off. The 2 days that we fished here, we didn't have a whole lot of current, and when we were sending baits down, they were kind of spinning up. And then we went to a spot where I knew sharks were a problem, and we dropped with the Zeppelins, and we weren't getting bit. And I'm like, well, okay, maybe there's not sharks here. I don't really understand. I feel like I'm marking them. We looked at the cameras. There's sharks swimming around, and they're not eating the fish. That was an eye-opener for me, because I've personally felt like when I've gone to areas where I haven't had shark interactions, they just weren't there. It's not the case now in the video. They're there, they're just not eating. So we took the Zeppelins off, and we dropped, and we caught fish without interaction. We went to another spot, and we didn't have the Zeppelins on, and the first drop we hooked a pair of amberjacks, and one of them got eaten by a shark. Okay, now we know that sharks are hungry. We put the Zeppelins on, we dropped down, we caught one fish without it, or one fish with it whole, another fish got eaten by a shark. Skepticism went through the roof, just to be flat out honest with you. And then the guys are like, you rigged it wrong. And I'm looking at Ed Killer, and I'm like, okay. So they explained it to me. They said, look, your drop wasn't far enough past the tail of the fish. So when the sharks came up, their instinct overrode when they got a bite of the fish. So it was kind of laying along the side of the fish, if that makes sense. It was too late. All right, so we re-rigged it. And for the rest of that day and the next day, we had 12 more depredation events, and 11 of them were without the Zeppelin. One was with the Zeppelin, and we caught close to 40 fish side by side with the Zeppelin that were not eaten over the next course of the next day. and I don't know if anybody follows us on social media, but I shared some of the videos. And one of the things that was another scary eye-opener to me was it wasn't one or two sharks. Like, okay, if they eat one or two fish, they're going to get full and leave. It was 12, 15, 20 sharks pack feeding on our fish. So that was an eye-opener to me that the problem is greater than I realized, and the effort that we've been trying to put in with a bunch of people over the last year really needs to continue to grow for awareness, because fish are being lost at an alarming number. You know, if you're fortunate enough to get a fish up, but then again it's too short bottom fishing, or the season's closed and then it's got to swim back down, pretty good chance if there's sharks there and he's coming back down slow, he might get eaten if you just got lucky in getting him up. So the dead loss factor is kind of a potentially scary number with a lot of this. So over the course of the next month up till this point, I started incorporating the Zeppelin, especially when grouper season opened, and I lost a couple of them rigging it the way I was rigging. So I said there's got to be a better mousetrap. Brainstormed it for quite a while and decided, actually I was talking about using it for tuna fishing and came up with an idea for tuna fishing and decided I should incorporate it. I'm talking out loud and have a solution for my bottom fishing, but I was thinking about tuna fishing. So what we've done now is we're just taking a carabiner clip and we're tying monofilament to the carabiner clip and then the mono to the Zeppelin, which is 6.5 ounces. If we're fishing a 10-foot leader, the way you want to rig this up is you take your average sized fish that you think you're going to catch. If let's say it's 30 inches or 36 inches, 3 feet, right? Amberjack's got to be 28, groupers have got to be 24. If you catch a nice grouper, you want to say he's 3 feet long, right? A cobia, 33 inches. So I am now going with a rule of thumb of if I have a 10-foot leader, I have a 3-foot fish, that's 13 feet, and this has got to be 3 feet behind it. This line is now 16 feet long. I leave this in my rod holder, and this is sitting on my cooler, my bait cooler right by my rod holder. Find a spot that it works for you. When my guys get a bite, the first thing I do is run and throw this in the water to get it sinking. And I tell the guys, keep cranking, but back up. And I just take this and hit it against the line. And there's so much tension, it just opens it, and I let it go. It slides down. Yeah, let me just tie a quick piece of mono on here so I can demonstrate it. It slides down over the 3-way swivel and catches on the bank sinker. And once it stops, now this is swung below your fish. And I will say that the guys asked me when we got done testing what I would be, actually Ed Killer I think asked me, he said, what would you be happy with saving fish? I said 25%. I'd say we're probably close to 80%. And the number of fish that we've caught where sharks have followed this up, we've seen the sharks, we know sharks are in the area, and I'm getting this on and it's working. So I have a fish on, I'm cranking up, I clip this on here, I don't have tension. Oh, there you go. I have a big fish on, looks like a yellow jack. And so the angler's fighting, I just lean over and clip it on, and of course it slides down to the fish, it catches on the bank sinker and then swings below. Obviously I made it short for demonstration purposes to work, but you would want that longer than your fish and longer than your hook. So 10-foot leader, 16-foot drop on your Zeppelin. I've had 2 occasions where this didn't work, actually 3, out of all the fish that we've caught in the last month using this. The first scenario, we caught a nice black grouper, probably 16 or 18 pounds. A shark followed it up. We went back, made another drift. It was pretty rough. It was probably 4 to 6 foot. And we had worked really hard to get some bites. And the guys got hooked up. I ran back, of course left the boat. And as soon as I did that, the boat turned sideways in the wind. I threw the Zeppelin over and I clipped it on. And I look and the carabiner clip's like, I can see it. It was stuck to my trim tab. It's such a powerful magnet. The boat like rocked and it like sucked up to the bottom of the boat. We got eaten by a shark. I didn't know what happened until we cranked the rig all the way up and the carabiner clip comes out of the water and it's slack, and I'm pulling and it came off the bottom of the boat. It was stuck to my running gear. We were fishing another area in 195 foot maybe a week or 10 days ago, and we had really good grouper fishing, but we had our biggest grouper of the day get eaten by a shark. But we got back 65%, 70% of it. The previous drift, we had 4 anglers fishing and we had light current, and when we have light current, I just let the boat lay side 2 fish, 2 people in the bow, 2 people in the stern. We had hooked 3 banded rudder fish at the same time. The first guy that hooked up got the Zeppelin and went down, and then I realized what we were dealing with, so I didn't hook the other ones on. Well, everything got tangled. All the fish coming up together, they all kind of swam together. I went and untangled everything, but when I did that, I clipped back leaders. I clipped back this because this is on different mono than everything else, so I can tell what it is. And when I retied it, I didn't put it back the way it should be. It was 100% my fault. The next drift, the young lady hooked a really nice grouper. I clipped it on, threw it down, and it got eaten. And when we pulled it in the boat, you could see that next to the fish that was eaten, this was only hanging right at the tail. So 100% my fault. Since then, and the rest of that day, we had 9, we caught, I think 3 or 4 more really nice gags. And everywhere we went, sharks followed them up. But what I did was, after that event, I sat down and I told everybody, because they're learning too. They're skeptical about it. They fish up north and everybody wants to try it because we're having problems everywhere. As I was frustrated, and I said, all right, I've got to go back. I'm going to retie everybody's leader, make sure everybody's leader is the same length. And we just took time. I took 10 minutes. I redid everything. I measured everything. I just do it with arm lengths, and just recalibrated. And next, if we got tangled again or anything happened, it was important enough after they saw it work a few times that we were okay, because why rush through it and lose the fish when you could take a few minutes, retie, and be successful in catching your fish. So again, super impressed. I think using this method minimizes your loss because you're not using it as a lead, right? I'm trying to get them to come up with another skew that's maybe 12 ounces, or maybe even a redesign. I did lose one to a kingfish. Okay, this is the way this is. If you hold it, it's equal weight. So when it goes down, even though it does sink, it kind of waffles, right? It's not leaded on one side. And after part of me being, I guess, lazy still, I've told myself that I'm going to zip tie a lead, like another bang sinker, a 4 ounce, 8 ounce, something like that, just to make it more streamlined to get down faster. And I haven't done it, but we haven't had another issue. And when I threw this over, I had this 16-foot leader or whatever, and it was cut off clean, like with 8 foot of leader. So the only thing I could think was this was all going down, like this, and the slack, and the king ate it and clipped the leader off is what I attribute it to. But I do think you'll minimize that risk if you zip tie another lead to the bottom and make it more hydrodynamic, for lack of a better word, where it goes straight down like that. And if you're fishing deeper water or a lot of current, you're going to want it to go down faster, right? So I haven't really gotten to that point here the last few days. We used it a bunch today. We did not have any depredation events. I felt like I marked a few sharks, but I didn't see any follow any of our fish up. So, maybe it was just the conditions, or maybe they weren't hungry like I saw on the video on the camera the day that we tested, because I do feel like I saw some of them swimming in the upper water column around where we were fishing, but we didn't have any issues. But if you're going to get into bottom fishing, I would give it a shot. In all honesty, I know they're giving one away here tonight. I believe. I'm not sure how that's getting done, but I would say it's a game changer for bottom fishing, especially with this style rig. Now, with a chicken rig, with the right conditions, to me it seems pretty ideal to use it as a lead, right? Thus, though, you run the risk of losing it. You get hung in the bottom, and at a price point of 75 bucks, it's it's hard enough to lose $5 leads all day. So if you've been bottom fishing, you're going to snag bottom all the time. It's just like if you go kite fishing, you're going to put kites in the water. It's just kind of the nature of the business and the nature of the style of fishing. So I think finding a way to incorporate it, and honestly, I haven't found a way to do it with a chicken rig where it's not going to slide down to the hook and potentially dehook a fish on top. Maybe using a smaller device or a smaller clip and having some kind of cork or something here where it could slide down, but then again that would slow it down. There's ways to fidget and play with it. I feel like most fishermen and fisherwomen are pretty inventive to the needs, and this seems to we have a need, we have a problem, and this is not going to solve the imbalance in the ecosystem that we have with the number of sharks here, but this is a really creative device that is at least giving us an opportunity to catch some fish or put more fish in the box. It's not going to do anything for post-release mortality, and if you're fishing 4 people and you're buying one, you're going to still lose fish. Obviously, if you hook 2 or 3 fish at the same time, but hopefully, if you do decide to use it, you'll start to see that you can catch a few more fish on the bottom with it. You had a question?
So when you're mutton fishing, you got that on a 54-foot leader?
No, sir. So if you remember when I was talking about the leader, so if I start to have problems with Goliath groupers or sharks mutton fishing with the long leader, I go to the breakaway sliding lead, right? I think Alex.
That's hooked to the lead?
Alex. Was Alex? Hey, do you have any spros? You got a spro swivel?
I understand that leader and the spros and the rubber
Okay.
band.
So what I would do.
You're using 16 foot on a 10-foot leader
Right.
for the group.
Understood. But what you're doing is when your lead hits the surface and it breaks away, you're making your 50-foot leader 2 foot, because it's all going to slide down and stop at 2 foot.
I get
so
it.
as your angler is cranking up in the rod holder on your nice mutton,
Then you only need that
you
5
clip
feet
you
long.
clip this on. You only need it 5 or 6 feet long, right? And it's going to slide down with the lead and everything else.
That makes sense.
And then when it hits the bead and the bead hits the swivel, the bank sinker hits the bead, then the carabiner's clip hits the bank sinker, and then it all swings below the fish.
Okay.
And that's going to stop a couple feet in front of your bait. So that's how that rig would work.
Okay.
Any other questions, guys? How are we looking on time? Am I supposed to keep talking? All right, we'll touch base on one more thing. I guess really I didn't talk about, that I think about. If there's anything else that you think of that you want to talk about, but obviously we did talk a little bit about public spots, obviously on charts. I do a lot of trolling. A lot of areas that we do fish can be productive for trigger fish. They can be productive for 40-pound groupers. When we're trolling, I'm always trolling with one of my bottom machines in zoom, and one of them on widescreen. Now the zoom still shows a widescreen feature, but if it's only about this wide on my split screen in front of me. So if I'm trolling and I mark a sail but I don't see it because the main part of the screen is on zoom for bottom, I've got my other display that's from 0 to 100 foot or whatever depth of water. It's from the surface to the bottom. So if I mark bait, if I mark tunas, if I mark a sail, if I mark kingfish, I can see that on my other machine when I look back at it. When I'm trolling, I'm constantly looking for bottom spots. And I tell you what, I mean, it's crazy with the technology now how many more spots I'm finding, because I can see something going off my screen out of the corner of my eye. I can stop the machine, scroll back, and save a waypoint. I mean, the number of spots that I've found in the last year since I put the new stuff on is incredible, to the point where I haven't even had time to fish a lot of them. But one thing about really quality spots, you'll find out, small relief spots that are maybe 3 to 5 foot off the bottom. If you're driving around and your screen is from 0 to the bottom, from the surface to the bottom, you're not going to see a 4 or 5 foot piece of relief. And the fuzz that you see that might be green and the bottom's dark red will look like nothing. But when you zoom it in, you see the green fuzz. It's a 3 foot, 4 foot ledge, and then there's two big red dots or Pac-Man looking ghosts, and those are groupers on my machine. And like, okay, you hit save, and then you tic-tac around the area, and you find that the ledge runs this way or what, and you have a whole new area to fish. One thing you're going to learn too, thanks to tropical storms and hurricanes and everything else that we deal with here in Florida, nor'easters and stuff like that, whenever we get a big swell, new spots get uncovered and old spots get covered up. So those spots that are 3 or 4 foot tall, sand may fill them in one day or fill in the ledge, even though there's still a little relief there and you stop marking fish there. But a mile away, another spot's been uncovered and there's fish there. So your bottom is constantly changing, especially after we have a swell. So if you want to look for spots, I'd recommend, you know, driving around and trying to focus on your bottom machine and fish it in a zoom. I typically fish the bottom 15 feet, right? If I'm out at the hill or I'm in deep water, I'll do 30 foot, but inside a 200 foot, I'll fish it at a 15 foot zoom. So I'm looking at the bottom 15 feet of the ocean floor. You can see if a 3 or 4 or 5, 6 foot contour is going to jump out at you like a lit Christmas tree. It's just going to stand out really well. If you see, speaking of Christmas trees, I mean, if you see a stack that looks like your Christmas tree, it's going to be an area that are snappers. Also, the big individual snappers on my machine mark like vertical red slashes. Then I said that like the groupers mark like Pac-Man ghost or little round red balls. And then when they start to swim, they actually look like a upside down swoosh or check mark. And you'll see them sitting in a spot, and then they start to move and they like worm and turn green along the bottom, where the echo kind of changes as they move. So you can start, once you start to figure out what your machine looks like and you drop in an area and you catch something, you say, oh, I marked this, must have been a grouper, I marked this, it must have been a snapper. And then when you're traveling around looking for new spots, you find out what's what pretty easily just by looking at it. So that comes with a little bit of trial and error. All the machines are different, but a lot of them are very similar as well. We have Raymarine stuff on the boat, and the Garmin stuff that I've used on the big boats were all very similar. Haven't played with Faruna or Simrad stuff, but most of the machines in the last 3 or 4 years all have the scroll back feature on the bottom machines, where you can scroll back and save your spot. You can zoom in on the spot. You know, even if you're fishing with it zoomed out, if you only have one screen and you're trolling looking for bait to catch mice or looking for tunas or whatever, and you mark something you think is, you can scroll back and then zoom in while it's paused and see if it's something you want to save, you know. And each and every one of those spots you bottom fish on, the higher the relief is, the better it's going to be for pelagics. But there's a lot of spots that are go-to spots for me during tournament and time and stuff like that during the winter to catch sails, that while I've been anchored up or while I've been grouper fishing, I've caught sardines there in 130 foot, or there's just something about that bottom that has different types of bait there, and you can continuously catch a sail while you're at anchor. And that only is going to happen so many times when I know that I can go there during the winter time when they're here and there can be some fish there. So you can start to piece all those pieces of the puzzle together. Like I did say with trolling with me, like yesterday, there was really no surface condition. We started out kite fishing yesterday. We caught one out of a couple sails pretty quick, and then a head of a bonita because a porpoise ate it. And then the wind fell out and I went trolling. There was no surface condition. I knew the guys wanted to bottom fish, so I just started to connect the dots, you know, from 70 foot to 180 foot, just driving over bottom, making a circle, looking for jacks, looking for life. And then once we found areas where there was some life, we switched over and went bottom fishing. So it's all part of the puzzles to put together every day. And I think if you employ some of those tactics, finding spots, it'll make you a better bottom fisherman in the long run. As far as conditions are concerned, we did talk a little bit about not knowing what's going on the bottom, feeling the lead. You know, you can crank your lead up and feel if it's ice cold or cold when you get up to the top. A lot of times when the bottom's cold, fish are going to be lethargic, so maybe anchoring up and using a cut bait as opposed to a live bait, you would be more likely to get a bite as opposed to drifting by at a quick pace. When we get south tide on the bottom, south tide is usually coincides with cold water and also dirty water. A lot of times the fish will bite really good on the first day of that, and on the second or third day it's shut down. If it's an extended period of time, the fish vacate, move to deeper water and stuff like that. Groupers can handle cold pretty well. I mean, you can catch a grouper and throw him in your fish box, and he can be alive in your box on ice, you know, a couple hours later, still breathing. His metabolism slows way down. That being said, a good thing to do would be to anchor up. If you feel like your leads are cold but you're marking fish, and try plug baits or dead baits as opposed to a live bait, something that they can just go over and it's not going to run away from them. And if you have cold water, again, with south tide, it's usually associated with dirty water, and so having something that has scent, like a plug bait, versus a live bait that doesn't have scent and would be hard to find on vibration, would be a better option as well. Any questions? No? You guys are an easy crowd. All right, well, I appreciate everybody coming. Hopefully you got some knowledge to take home with you, and I think they're going to do a giveaway.